Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege for me to welcome you all here to CPR today. Particularly special because it turns out, coincidentally, that today is CPR's 45th birthday. and uh, where one of the CPR's legends of the past has been its involvement and engagement on issues of South Asia. And so it's only fortunate that it coincided with the talk that Farzana is going to be giving us this afternoon as a run-up to the tea that we are going to have after for CPR faculty to celebrate our 45th birthday. It's a real privilege, Farzana, for me to welcome you here today for what promises to be a really important and interesting talk. Most of us in India have many questions about what's happening in Pakistan and are trying to make sense of the elections and what that means both for the changes that are going on domestically within Pakistan, but also, of course, the question of Indo-Pak relations. So we are very excited to hear your talk, and I suspect there will be lots of questions and discussion afterwards. For all of you, by way of introduction, Farzana is an associate fellow of the Asia Pacific program at the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. She is a specialist on Pakistan and has lectured and held senior research positions at universities in the UK, Europe, and the United States. She's written widely on the history, politics, of Pakistan, and in particular, we are very privileged today to have her the latest edition of her book, Making Sense of Pakistan, which is available outside for anyone who would like to buy a copy. And is considered to be one of the great masterpieces that help many outside of Pakistan to understand Pakistan better. So over to you, Farzana, and thank you very much again for being here, and a very warm welcome to you to CPR and to very polluted and foggy Delhi. Can you hear me? Oh, is that... Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you again. Of course, it's a great pleasure. I can hardly believe I'm here, actually. So difficult have the two countries made it for their citizens to travel to each other's lands and to get to know each other directly, that when I was finally granted this visa, although I don't travel on a Pakistani passport, I am of Pakistani origin. When I was finally granted this visa, I could hardly believe my eyes. But I must say, to the credit of the Indian High Commission in London, that they pulled out all the stops, and they were really very, very kind to me. So if that is an index, perhaps of a certain softening of tone, then we must welcome it. But anyway, the point today is, of course, this wonderful opportunity to talk to you, and I have the CPR to thank, Yamini in particular, who invited me to come and speak here. And it just turned out that the dates matched, because of course with Diwali coming up, I wasn't at all sure that it was going to be doable, but, well, here I am, and here you are. Thank you all for being here. So really what I want to do today is to reflect on the 2018 general elections in Pakistan. Of course, there are going to be many questions about these elections. They raise a range of questions, but my particular focus today really will be looking at Islamic parties, their performance, the surge of Islamic parties, if you will, and what this spells for the so-called moderate voter in Pakistan, which I have, of course, rather provocatively put in my title as being something of an invention. But I'll leave that, for you to decide. Now, the surge of radical Islamic parties as major electoral forces, and the rise of what some observers in Pakistan are calling a new class of militant clerics, have been amongst the most talked about
developments following the recent elections in Pakistan. The reasons, of course, are not hard to find. Many believe that these freshly minted contenders for power not only pose an unprecedented challenge to mainstream parties in Pakistan, but also spell the end of more established parties of the religious right, which now stand to be sidelined by the promotion of a distinctly aggressive, if not pernicious, style of Islamic politics. Now, it was unquestionably the electoral debut of militant groups such as the pro-Barelvi Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, or TLP, which is, as all of you must know, currently making headlines again, that first set alarm bells ringing. Registered as a party less than a year ago, the TLP emerged as the political arm of the anti-blasphemy movement, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Ya Rasulullah, which gained notoriety in 2017 for forcing the resignation of the then law minister on grounds of blasphemy. He had been accused of allegedly seeking to amend Pakistan's electoral forms in ways that his critics claimed would have allowed the Ahmadi minority, judged as non-Muslims under the Constitution of Pakistan in 1974, to vote as Muslims. But it was arguably the controversy following the execution in 2016 of Mumtaz Qadri, killer of the governor of Punjab, Salman Taseer, in 2011, that really galvanized the TLP as a political force. With opposition to Qadri's execution as a rallying cry, the TLP took to social and news media to catapult the group to public attention and to bring its leader, Khadim Hussain Rizvi, to the notice of voters at home. Within months, the TLP had sought registration as a political party, and having secured it in 2017, stood poised to enter its first electoral contest. It was in Lahore in September of that year, in 2017, while contesting the by-election held to fill the seat recently vacated by deposed Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, that the TLP put on an astonishing performance by emerging as the third largest party behind the PMLN and the PTI, but ahead of the PPP and certainly well ahead of its peers among more established religious parties. Since then, the TLP has continued to garner attention for its outspoken demands to execute blasphemers and to celebrate their murderers. With its ardent embrace of Barelvi activism, the party has also made a point, notably, of rejecting the long-standing association of Barelvi Islam with traditions of Sufi spiritualism, endorsed by long-established Barelvi political organizations such as the Jamiatul Ulema-e Pakistan. But the TLP is by no means alone in riding the crest of a new wave of more muscular expressions of political Islam in Pakistan. Among its counterparts are Deobandi militant groups, such as the newfangled Sunni sectarian Rahe-Haq Party, aka Sipahe Sahaba Pakistan, or SSP, which also contested the elections. Like the TLP, it too is known to harbor Sunni activists impatient with the politics of their more conservative-minded religious elders, notably leaders of Pakistan's premier Deobandi organization, the Jamiatul Ulema-e Islam. Yet another recently formed outfit that took to the hustings this year went by the name of the Allahu Akbar Tehreek. Representing Salafi, that is to say, Ahle Hadith activists with close ties to the prescribed organization Jamaatul Dawa, aka Lashkar-e-Tayyiba, the Allahu Akbar Tehreek emerged after its forerunner, the Milli Muslim League, was refused registration by the Election Commission of Pakistan in 2017. The commission, which declared the Milli Muslim League to be a front for the JUD, had warned the group against using the name to contest elections, a problem soon resolved by its members who simply assigned a new name to their organization. As there is no formal mechanism at present to officially communicate the names of banned outfits and individuals associated with them to the Election Commission of Pakistan, leaders of such outfits continue to take advantage of this loophole to get their parties enlisted with the Election Commission under different names to contest elections. That said, it is worth noting that while the Allahu Akbar Tehreek may enjoy the favor of senior leaders of the LET, including its leader, Hafiz Saeed, the group itself is viewed with some trepidation by sections of Pakistan's conservative military establishment keen to ensure that the LET's radical protégés should abide by the unspoken agreement between the LET and its military masters to refrain from attacks against the Pakistani state and its institutions. But the general disquiet aroused by the onward march of these new purveyors of radical Islam has also led, somewhat curiously I think, to a parallel and more pronounced confidence in the power of Pakistan's so-called moderate voter. Cast as an object of adulation, Pakistan's moderate voter has long enjoyed iconic status for his purported resistance to extremist thinking and for his extraordinary powers to keep at bay religious zealots who are believed to obscure, quote, the real Pakistan, where appeals to religion are believed to cut no ice. Reassuring headlines that followed the results of these elections and that loudly proclaimed the failure of religious parties to, quote, impress or to, quote, make their presence felt are characteristic of the faith commonly reposed in the moderate voter. Wheeled out as evidence that Islamic causes carry little weight in the calculations of Pakistan's dominant electorate, the idea of the moderate voter has also been used to lend substance to claim that, as elsewhere, this voter is more responsive to worldly goods offered by so-called mainstream parties with broad agendas, rather than to promises of divine largesse held out by niche religious parties. In recent years, but especially since 9/11, the idea of the moderate voter in Pakistan has arguably assumed greater salience. With the country still struggling to shed its mantle as a protective cover for the promotion of extremist ideologies resting on Islam, the moderate voter has come to serve as a powerful image to project Pakistan as a modern Muslim state where Islamic parties and their programs enjoy little purchase. Now, in the time left, I want to explore a little more closely how far the outcome of these latest general elections in Pakistan may allow us to infer that if Islamic religious parties performed badly, there must necessarily be a moderate voter out there who is indifferent to questions of Islam or unmoved by controversies that are judged to offend Islamic sensibilities. In other words, is there, as we have been led to believe, a necessary correlation between the weakness or the electoral weakness of Islamic parties and the putative strength of Pakistan's moderate voter? Let me start with some bald figures drawn from the Election Commission of Pakistan that do indeed confirm the modest performance of Pakistan's Islamic parties in the recent general elections. They show that the total number of votes cast in favor of Islamic parties in these elections stood at just over 4.6 million votes, representing a mere 9% of the total estimated 54 million votes cast nationwide. While this share of the vote in favor of Islamic parties was certainly up from their share of 5% in 2013 and sharply above the 3% they secured in 2008, it failed to exceed these parties' historical national average of about 10% and was certainly nowhere near their all-time high of 12% in 2002. The total number of seats won by Islamic parties in the 2018 general elections was also disappointing. The recently revived coalition of established religious parties, the Muttahida Majlis-e-Amal or MMA, won just 12 National Assembly seats, compared to its stunning count of 59 National Assembly seats won in 2002. The newly minted TLP, for all its hectoring discourse, won no seats in the National Assembly, though it did secure 2 seats in the Sindh Assembly. The hardline Salafi group, the Allahu Akbar Tehreek, won no seats at all, either at the national or provincial level, while the Sunni sectarian Rahe-Haq party gained only 1 seat in the Punjab Assembly. But this dismal performance ought not to be blamed on the lack of effort. Indeed, what was noteworthy about these elections was the sheer number of candidates fielded by Islamic parties, more than 1,500, who contested seats to the national and provincial assemblies. The MMA fielded 192 candidates for the National Assembly, while the TLP alone nominated more than 550 candidates for seats to the national and provincial assemblies. Nor were these endeavors altogether futile. The TLP's aggressive Islamic discourse clearly chimed with at least 2.2 million voters nationwide, leaving it in position as the 5th largest political party in Pakistan, behind the presently ruling PTI, the PMLN, the PPP, and the MQM, in terms of the total number of votes cast in its favor. It is also by no means insignificant that one of the 2 Sindh Assembly seats captured by the TLP in Karachi was wrested from the PPP in the strongly working-class district of Liari, long a bastion of the PPP, where the TLP combined its single-issue, non-negotiable agenda centered on blasphemy with the deft use of local patronage structures and an appeal to working-class Barelvis alienated from traditional Barelvi leadership dominated by scholars and spiritual leaders. The TLP's skillful use of social media and its access to the internet also allowed it to penetrate sections of the working class with higher levels of literacy, not always gained at madrasas, by the way, where educated voters were found to be responsive to the TLP's brand of theology. So the question really is this: why, given these remarkable efforts, did religious parties not perform better? Was it because of the sway of the elusive moderate voter and his reputed impatience with Islamic parties? Or was it because, as many have come to suspect, the language of political Islam is no longer, if it ever was, the preserve of Pakistan's religious parties? To answer this, we need to take on board one of the most significant features of these elections, namely the near total appropriation of Islamist agendas, many highly toxic in their implications, by mainstream parties. One way to account for this close embrace of Islamist agendas by mainstream parties and their integration into mainstream campaigns is to regard it as a direct, if somewhat unintended consequence of a controversial state-sponsored policy that has come to be known as mainstreaming. First mooted in 2016 by Pakistan's security establishment, it sought to validate radical Islamist groups as legitimate political actors on the assumption that, by doing so, it would encourage them to change and moderate their discourse, while allowing them a creative outlet to channel their energies, and in the long term, hopefully contain their jihadist impulses. But while this policy has proved to be a signal failure in diluting the vocabulary of radical Islamist groups, or indeed coaxing them to moderate their positions, let alone prevailing on them to abandon their jihadist discourse, its effect on the conduct of mainstream parties has been profound. Once hedged in by the language of moderation, these parties now found themselves liberated to draw freely from a common pool of extremist ideologies without fear of sanction or indeed fear of alienating political constituencies that might once have been seen as instinctively reluctant to support agendas that breached the middle ground. The consequences have been twofold. First, they have prized open the discursive terrain long regarded as the principal domain of Islamic parties, allowing better organized mainstream party machines to appeal directly to a religious vote bank. Secondly, they have raised questions about the credibility of the moderate voter, whose reputed disdain for Islamist agendas risks being compromised by mainstream political parties now dedicated to sharpening Pakistan's Islamic profile, whether through calls for more stringent laws against blasphemy aimed, more often than not, against Pakistan's religious minorities, or by offering blueprints for an Islamic welfare state informed by 7th century principles predicated on the consolidation of Muslim power. Both issues featured prominently in the campaigns of Imran Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which won the elections. They were also prominent in the campaigns launched by the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, the PTI's closest competitor. But they were no less central also to the electoral platforms of the TLP and the LET-inspired Allahu Akbar Tehreek. So what kind of conclusions can we draw from these developments? Do they herald the steady erosion of Pakistan's religious parties, whose Islamic thunder is being roundly stolen by mainstream parties? And if so, what of the future of Pakistan's moderate voter, whose credibility has depended precisely on keeping alive the dichotomy between mainstream and Islamic parties? In the time left, I would like to turn my attention to these questions. So let me do so by claiming, not unreasonably I hope, that while these elections may well have left Pakistan's religious parties on the back foot once again, at least in terms of parliamentary seats gained, it spells neither their demise as serious electoral players, or indeed their role as formidable agents with the power to set national agendas. The number of votes cast in favour of religious parties in some constituencies, especially in Punjab and parts of urban Sindh, should disabuse us of any notion that religious parties and their Islamic causes are on their way out in Pakistan. While it is true that in many constituencies religious parties acted as spoilers in the service, it is said, of a larger plan by Pakistan's military establishment to disadvantage Sharif's PMLN in favour of Imran's PTI, this was by no means the case in all constituencies. In some National Assembly constituencies, such as Nankana Sahib in the Sheikhupura district of the Punjab, the TLP emerged as a legitimate player in its own right, losing to the PTI and the PMLN by a mere fraction of the votes. In other constituencies in the Punjab, including Attak near Islamabad and Narowal in Sialkot district, the TLP again put in an impressive show, finishing in second and in third place. The trend was repeated in key constituencies in Karachi, encompassing the industrial estates around Korangi and the relatively more affluent zones of Karachi South, where the TLP finished again in second and third place, behind the hitherto dominant pro-Urdu-speaking ethnic party, the Muhajir Qawmi Mahaz, and the PTI. Many observers believe, rightly I think, that were it not for Pakistan's first-past-the-post electoral system, these gains could well have translated into more seats for the TLP. But it is arguably through the mainstreaming of their radical discourse that Islamic parties in Pakistan have scored their greatest success in these elections. What is indisputable is that following these elections, Islamic parties, instead of moderating their discourse, have effectively radicalized the political mainstream. Nowhere was this brought more sharply into focus than in the mainstreaming of the Khatm-e-Nubuwwat or finality of the Prophet issue, a key concern of all religious parties, and notably the TLP, which saw senior leaders of the PTI and the PMLN embrace the most draconian clauses of Pakistan's blasphemy law and heap praise during their election campaigns on Mumtaz Qadri, killer of Salman Taseer, as a stout defender of Islam. Shortly after taking power, the PTI government famously agreed to the dismissal of the distinguished economist Dr. Atif Mia as a member of the government's Economic Advisory Council for belonging to the Ahmadi community. These elections then can be seen not only to have significantly advanced the Islamization of the political sphere in Pakistan, but also to have enabled the unprecedented convergence of mainstream and religious parties. So where does this leave Pakistan's moderate voter? Are we poised to witness his disappearance as a distinct and purportedly dominant voice of the electorate? I think not. For the idea of the moderate voter is now too closely tied to the credibility of Pakistan's much-prized international image as a beacon of Muslim moderation. But it is also clear that the growing convergence between mainstream and Islamic parties, as witnessed in these elections, risks exposing Pakistan's moderate voter as something of a fiction. Its momentum could also be hastened by other developments, such as a concerted move among recently formed Barelvi parties, including the TLP, to renounce their genealogical roots. These have long tied Barelvi expressions of Islam to local shrine cultures in Pakistan, informed by Sufi mystical traditions which have tended, though not always, to place a special accent on pluralism, tolerance, and pacifism. And it is precisely these traditions that have been routinely invoked by successive governments in Pakistan to underscore the dominance of the moderate voter on grounds that the majority of the country's voters are Sunni Muslims who subscribe to Barelvi Islam. But today these traditional narratives are being strongly challenged by latter-day Barelvi groups in favor of more muscular varieties of Barelvi Islam to match their sectarian rivals among the Deobandis and followers of the Ahl Hadith. The issue of blasphemy with its symbolic associations tied to the veneration of the Prophet Muhammad, a key tenet of Barelvi thinking, has served as a powerful catalyst to drive this newer and singularly assertive expression of Barelvi Islam. And it is not without irony, perhaps, that the TLP, which claims to speak on behalf of a Barelvi majority, today urges this majority to shed its moderate tag and its association with Sufi mysticism, claiming that it was deliberately designed to please the West and tame Islam. However important these discursive shifts may prove to be in the long run, and it is too early, I think, yet to assess their full implications, there are still good grounds to believe that we may be witnessing the steady redefinition of the moderate voter in Pakistan. From a figure once exclusively identified as a supporter of so-called mainstream parties, whose priorities were held to differ sharply from those embraced by their religious counterparts, the moderate voter looks set to become equally emblematic of Islamic parties now ready to be recast as mainstream contenders for power, in contrast to their more radical peers on the political fringes. If so, it could mean older, more established Islamic parties of the MMA kind, for example, emerging in future with an equal claim to promote a moderate agenda once held to be exclusively the preserve of Pakistan's non-religious mainstream parties. Many already seem poised to do so by appealing to a wider constituency of voters whose purported concern with civic issues received at least as much attention during these elections from established Islamic parties as these parties' known dedication to Islamic causes. One indication was the manifesto of the MMA and its constituent parties, which pledged to resolve Pakistan's problems with water scarcity, improve the country's road networks, and promised to tackle the country's chronic power shortages. Nor were questions of foreign policy ignored by religious parties. MMA candidates on the campaign trail were seen vigorously debating Pakistan's relations with China and assessing the merits of CPEC projects. Many candidates also called for the strict implementation of Pakistan's counter-terrorist national action plan to put an end to what they claimed was, quote, interference by American, Indian, and Israeli intelligence services. So in conclusion, I would say, therefore, that however unclear its contours at the present time, Naya Pakistan is likely to continue ensuring a privileged place for the moderate voter, though not perhaps this moderate voter as we have known him or her, as the case may be. Thank you.